Samech the
Tet Vav, Hamshach Samech Vav, Tet Vav Sivan, Atavshim Samech Ches, page Kuf Samech Ches, Kuf Samech Tes.
It's on length the Shitta of the Mukavalim Rishonim, and we read some Maskana particularly in the light of the Avodas HaKodesh, in the name of the Ramban, that they hold that the Keser, or what they call in the name of the Ramban, we know the Rotzen HaKadmain. Then we saw that Rotzen, or that Keser, what they held was a Madrega Vein Seif, was Kadmain Kekadmas Ein Seif, even though it was Olu Min Ein Seif. So we saw that represented a question: how can something which is Mamish Olu Mimeno, how can it be described as Kikadmusai, Kadmain Kekadmusai? And we saw that the Rebbe said that Shum Shaloi Hoya's Man Shaloi Hoya Horotzen. So we discussed it at some length at the end of the last year, how it fits into the Maimon Chazal and the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Ad Shaloi Hoya, Ad Shaloi Nivro Ho'ilam, Hoya Hu Shmei Bilvad. So we saw how that maybe can be mufurish Lefi the Lashon of the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. The Haramach Choylech al Zeh, we saw that the Ramach differed with that, because he held the Rein Litain Shum Kadmus Shum Dova Hanimtzu Mimena only to the Eibishter himself. V'chein hu be emes, and we saw that the Alter Rebbe, he held a different shitta, and he held that there was what we call a Amshocha, the Gilui. That's not Kadmain Kikadmusa Yispara. And that's called Oyer. That's what that's how he understands the Lashon of the Rizal, and the Mukabolim came out to the Rizal Lashon for Oyer. And he said that Oyer, which was Bo Gilui from the Atzmas, and we'll soon see what's the difference between Oyer Bo Gilui and Oyer which is Kolov Atzmus. Loi mipnei shehu b'chinas kadmas chas v'sholem, to say that ki mipnei shehu me'ein hamoyer. So we were didactic in that whole concept of me'ein, even though, as we pointed out, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe is ke'ein, not with the mem, but anyway, we have to assume that the kavanah is the same. V'lochein u have b'koyach olein say. And we saw that the Chisavas is dafke from that oil, not from the Atzmas itself, but dafke from the oil. But the oil is only a dovish olu mimeno, or nimshach mimeno. It's not kadmus ke kadmusai, and it's only the koyach adei safe, which is literally behelim betuicha oil, and that's alidei the concept of me'ein, or dafke alidei there. Is the Hisavas. If I'm according to the Alter Rebbe, we avoid the problem of saying that the intermediary madrega between the Ein Seif, between the Atzmas and the Hisavas of the Bria Yesh Mi'ayin is Kadman Kekadmusay.
Why is it that with the early Mukabalim, why is it that this whole svara why is it that their whole svara, why does that make it that they can't call Atzmus Ein Sof?
Why they can't call the Oyer Atzmus Ein Sof?
Why can't they call Atzmus Ein Sof just because of their svara? Why can't they call Atzmus Ein Sof?
Why can't they call Atzmus Ein Sof? Well, I mean, they do. They say that there is Atzmus Ein Sof. And then there's a Niroim. But they say in the middle there's a Madrega called Shmoi, or Retainer. And that's like a madrega between the Atzmas and the Nivroim. Well, about it, they say that there is such a thing as Atzmas. So therefore, that's the shitta of the Alter Rebbe. Now, that's what we were holding. We were holding at the beginning of Kuf Samach Tes, right? Right near the top?
Yeah.
Right. V'zeu ma shechidush Rabbeinu Nishmos Eden. And this is what the Alter Rebbe, Rabbeinu Nishmos Eden, refers to the Alter Rebbe. This is the thing that he brought, the new idea and the new chiddush that he brought into the whole inyan. The ha'oyer nikra ein seif, that the earth can be given that name ein seif with all the inner pirushim and perfection that we saw in the word ein seif. All that can be given into the oyer. Mipnei shehu meyein hamoyer. In other words, with all that wondrous concept of mi'ain and all that implies, like we discussed at length in the previous classes, with that the Alter Rebbe literally earns the two extremities. On the one hand, he says that the is only a olo mimenu, therefore it's not kadmin kikabmusay, and it's only a ha'ora mimenu bulvad, it's not atzmusay chlau, and it's b'derech chidush ha'ora shahoyele man shahoyer kodmoy heder, therefore it's not kadmus. Afu pikein, it davkis through the medium of the is the Yisavas. And with that he avoids saying that the Yisavas was alidei ha'atzmus mamish. And yet on the other hand, the oyer is only a olu mimenu, but the svara maftechias, the key svara of the Alter Rebbe is this idea of me'ein ha'mo'oyer. And we saw that BMS, the me'ein ha'mo'oyer is dependent in another factor or svara, and that's what we called the Devekis behamoyer, and that's a concept of oyer. That's the hemshech and the shleimas of the marshal of oyer, in that oyer is dovuk behamoyer, until the whole metzius of oyer is only shaykh when there's the moyer, and it's only shaykh mitzad the Devekis in the moyer, and therefore mitzad that Devekis that comes as a hemshech and a teitzor from that fact, or that factor, meyein amoyer, ve'ilu, to on the other side, le'idu kisa, it has absolutely no erech whatsoever cloud to the moyer, and it's only an olu mimenu yizborah. Amukubalim Rishonim, because if we compare those Mukubalim Rishonim to the Alter Rebbe, then Daitom, the Shmoi, Shehu HaRotzen, Hu Ein Seif Mitzad Atzmoi Kanal. We saw that the whole differing factor between the Mukubalim Rishonim and the Alter Rebbe is that they hold that the union of Shmoi, based on the Maimon the Pirkei Rebbe who Shmoi Bilvad, the Ramah Mipano called that Rotzen, and like we saw, Shmoi is Begematria Rotzen, and they said that the Ein Seif, which is in that Be'etzav, Mitzad Atzmoi. All the Pirushim that we were Mavaya in the term Ein Seif are to be found in that Gilui Mimena called Shmoi or Rotzen, in a Eifen Atzmi, not like the Alter Rebbe that he says that the oyer itself is only a ha'ora and it's a dover she'eshli tichlo, but mitzad the devekis and the me'ein amoyer, it's got the koyach of the ein. Ve'ila, these mukubalim arishonim, they have the opinion that madrega, what they call shmoi or keser, or that has the Indian for Ein Seif, with all the pirushim that we said in it, in its own right, not mitzad the devekis in the moyer, but in itself, it has in itself the Indian of Ein Seif. The Rabbeinu Chiddush, and the Alter Rebbe brought a new Chiddush into the whole Indian, the Shmoi hu oyer. The Alter Rebbe said that concept of Shmoi is the idea of oyer. For who Ein Seif, loy mitzadat, and it taka has the perfection of the concept of Ein Seif, but not in its own right. Ki mitzad hamoyer da'ainu shu me'ein hamoyer. Now, why would the Alter Rebbe teach that the inyan from Shmoi is oyer? Actually, nivro ha'olam hoyer hu Shmoi bilvad. So the Ramah, b'derech remez at the beginning, but then derech shita, he said Shmoi is begimatir rotzen. That afar, but that inyan from hoyer hu Shmoi bilvad indicates an inyan from rotzen. And for the reasons we pointed out much earlier in these classes, the Alter Rebbe wants to avoid calling that by the name Rotzen. Even though, we'll see as we go along, there are certain traces which border on a concept of Rotzen in that Inyan, in that Gilui, but the Amitis HaGilui is not yet Rotzen, because Rotzen is already a Hamshocha towards, which indicates that there's already a specific Kavona, or there's some goal or some Inyan that we're looking for, which somehow or another defines the Etzem Hamshocha. Therefore, when you say Rotzen, you mean already a certain definitive or defined derivation of the nefesh towards a certain Inyan. So the same way we would have to say that if we say Rotzen. And if says the Alter Rebbe, that what the Pirchei the Rebbe Eliezer says, Hoyehu Shmoi, then that is referring to a concept called Oyer, to this whole wondrous idea of light. Now, why would he say that Shmoi is only, or Shmoi is the infinite Oyer? Why would the Alter Rebbe tell that? Even though the emes is, we're only talking here in a definitional, general way. There are certain drushim and chassidus, but they make differences between Shmoi and Oyer. In a very deeply defined way, you can't always equalize Shem with Oyer. Sometimes Oyer and Shem have differing as far as in chassidus. However, here even Kloli, if we talk about the Giluim from the Ein Seif prior to the Tzimtzum, then the Alter Rebbe says that Shmoi is Oyer, and the reason for that is that if we look at the concept of a name, then we see that a name is not in any way the essence of the thing. For example, we take a name of a person, then the name is not his essence by any means. The name is only I don't mind, I don't like people sitting with drawing room poses during the classes, if you don't mind. You have to sit, well, you have to find yourself a chair, and you have to find yourself a table, and you have to prepare yourself, but I don't like people sitting with that type of drawing room pose, if you don't mind. I'm not suggesting that you weren't paying attention, but everything has got its particular. For example, in the army, when you got to stand to the parade, you can have the best of kavanas. You can say that you are a wonderful soldier and you are better than everybody, but you got to stand the way everybody else stands, doesn't it? You got to do it in a certain disciplined way, and doubtless, doubtless that also has its milas, also benegir to pinimis advarim. Anyway, Shmoi and Oyer are the same inyan. The name of a person is not by any means his essence, because we could imagine a person living without a name. We can imagine him just having been born on a desert isle or something, and everybody left him, and he just grew up with and he wasn't ever given a name. We can imagine him living without a name. So the emes is that in Pnimis Adorim you can't really say that he doesn't have a name. He does. It's just that they didn't call his name Begoloi. Over the emes is, he has, the Alter Rebbe is Mavayad in Lekutei Torah and Pasha Bolok, which is not that far away from where we are now. But, hopefully Moshe will intercept us before we get to Pasha Bolok, and we'll learn Pasha Bolok with Moshe Tzidkenu together. However, over there in Pasha Bolok, the Alter Rebbe is Mavaya that the name, the Inyan from Shem, does exist by everybody, because the name which you have is a form of Hamshocha and Gilui of the Oyer HaNeshama, which is too high to enter the body exactly as it is, but the way it comes in and enters the body and is Mechaya the body at close range, you might call it, but that is through the name that you have. Therefore you must have a name, and the person who doesn't have a name, he really does, but he just doesn't know what it is. And so therefore Lefi Seh is very understandable, and it comes out very well what the famous beer of the Mezritch Magid, what he gave over in the name of the Arizal, what he said, that when parents call a name at a bris, that is a nevuah ktana. So what's the difference between a Navur Ktana and a Navur Gedela is interesting to be misbainan. Upon him, it's a Navur, it's a Geda of Navur. And therefore, it's well known that you must never interfere with the parents when they call the name. You must always let them make their own decision in reference to the name. Therefore, the Rebbe wrote on many occasions in the letters, you must always let the parents themselves decide what is the name, and you shouldn't come along and boss them around and give them all sorts of instructions. Hey, you want the child to be called this and that and something else. There'll be a family crisis if you don't call him by the Zayder and the Bava. So that you should call, but that has to be left to the parents. If they decide that, then that's the way it is. And because really when the parents give a name, they are what you might call a Maila Miateva, touching on that name which Palavok is there. In other words, the name is a thing which is there. You've just got to get at it and find what it is. And what is the purpose of bringing it out into Golui? That helps and assists by calling it Begolui, that's a infant further Hamshocha into a Madrega Peshuta in its relationship to the Guf. And it also assists in all sorts of ways that when a person hears these name calls that it affects him, which means that the name does really have a certain connection with a very important aspect of the person. However, on the other hand, it's only a ha'ora mimeno. It's not really his very essence or the etzem of his neshama. It's only a gilu, a certain medium being used to help the neshama affect the guf and to carry out its islapshus in the go. And Mamma, if he said, is that on the one hand, the inif and shame is an important gilui of the person, has an important reference to him. On the other hand, it's not him at all, and it can only be called a ha'ora bilvad. So that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying, that the concept of shame has an those in yon. Mitzad echad, it's only a ha'ora bilvad. Mitzad hasheni, it does have a certain close connection with the Inyan Apnimiyah and with certain Yonim which are negated to more Achmistic chayas of the man or life of the man. Therefore, that's the idea of calling the Gilui Mimenu is bar, but there are ha'ora of calling it Shmoy, or in his language calling it Oya. And so therefore he teaches that you don't have to say that Shmoy is the Inyan from Rotz and Mash, no, you can say that Shmoy is the Inyan from Oya. But who ain't safe? Not according to those Mukabalim Rishonim. It's not ain't safe mitzad itself. Yeah, in its own right does it have the infant ain't safe. Ki im mitzad moer. It's only mitzad da'aynu shu mi'ena. Mitzad this wondrous svara. The Alter Rebbe is mechadish it is mi'ein hamoer. V'yesh ba oer. He says, Rebbe, the truth of the matter is, we have to admit, Hainu ba'er akolu bi'atzmusay, in the which is kalul in the very essence of the Eibishter, as compared to what he said right at the first line, there's a abor b'gilui. In other words, that the Alter Rebbe is two madregas in this which is meya achmus. There's a infant which is meya b'golui mimenu, and then there's another Hainu ba'er akolu bi'atzmusay, another what you might call aspect of the earth. It can't really be called a madrega, but an aspect of the earth. But that's a bechina shu, bechinas kadmen kikadmusa is bara. He said, what ain't nachanami you'll be able to say about that? Kadmen kikadmusa aval zehu masha eina bechinas metzius oyer klal klal. Omamela lo yiksha al ze kushis aramachsal ukamashi is poor. So the Alter Rebbe said that is, even though we call it Oyer, that's only just a Shem HaMushal. It's a borrowed name. It's not really Oyer. And yet, on the other hand, it's not really the Achmus Mamish either. It's not Mamish the Pshitas of the Achmus, but it's called Oyer HaKolu Bi'at Achmus. On that you can say Kadminke Kadmusay, because there was never a point that wasn't there, because it's not really there. It's there, but it's not really. And that's what the Alter Rebbe said, that it's not a matzius of oyer. Now the truth of the matter is that you can't really talk about oyer and that madrega being a matzius, because like we point out, the word matzius indicates a a found and defined entity. What he means to say is, however much you can call oyer a matir, however much oyer is some sort of entity, because it's been revealed via Atzmas, this oyer which is kolol b'adam, you can't say that about it. So what we're doing then is like, once again, we're like having our cake and eat it too. On the one hand we're saying that it's oyer, on the other hand we're saying that it's not oyer. On the other hand it's not the Atzmas, and this is really what you might call a hedek, which we don't really need to take on ourselves at this moment, because in the coming Maimah there's going to be, well, not the coming Maimah, but the Maimah after the coming Maimah, there's going to be quite a lengthy discussion about that, or what is that particular inyan. So maybe we'll leave it to suffice it to say that you guys no doubt do your chittas und gute Sachen. So just about a week ago in the chittas, or a few days ago in the chittas, we met up with this particular inyan, even though you may not have recognized it b'golui kokach, but it's there, and that's that the Alter Rebbe in Perik Gimel of Shara Yichavamna, the Alter Rebbe says that there are two madregas in the Oyer Hameya Mia Hashemesh. He said there's the Oyer Hameya Mia Hashemesh B'tei Cholol Ha'olam, it's in the whole, what you call space, or Cholol, how do you call it, the Cholol of space, and then he says that there's a Oyer HaKolol B'tei Guf Kadur Hashemesh. It's a Oyer which is entwined inside the very goof of the Shemesh. And he brings a Kal V'chema with that. And he says, She'im ha'oyer yochil lahoyer b'tei cholol ha'olam l'merachik b'tei cholol ha'olam Kal V'chema she'yochil lahoyer bim koimoy. He said, if it's able to be meir way out there in the cholol ha'olam, then it's a Kal V'chema that it must be able to be meir bim koimoy. In other words, mamish inside the guf kadur Hashem, there must be the also. You can't just say that it's only out there. And so, what does he mean by that? He said, "In Kenkum there's a meir shemesh, and then there's a oyer which is meir inside of where the shemesh in its own self. There's meir oyer, and that's better kalver." So the shaila is, why did the Alter Rebbe need to bring a kalver? Why didn't he say Kal V'chema? He just said Yeshua Kol B'tei Hashemesh, Yeshua Meir B'Shemesh. Why did he have to go that way? Why did he have to say, oh, that oil which is Meir out there, if it can be Meir out in the Chol, Kal V'chema, She'yogel Ahoyer Bim Boim. So it's hard to say that the Indian of the Kal V'chema is just to be Mechazik the Indian, just B'derech Kil Pilpul Haloshin. And the far with that, it's brought down in certain Drush Chassidus, that with that the Alter Rebbe wants to hint that that oyer which is Kol Bim Koimoi is another type of oyer altogether than the oyer which is Meir B'tei Cholol Ha'olam, and therefore he uses the Kal V'chema. Kal V'chema stresses your great emphaticness in the thing that you learn out. You come to a thing, but there are Kal V'chema, it's got a certain Meile Gedoyle to it. So with that, the Alter Rebbe tends to indicate, or wants to indicate, according to these Drush Chassidus, that oyer hakol b'tei guf kadur hashemesh, well, that's a much greater and more elevated form of oyer, even compared to the oyer which is meir b'tei cholol ha'olam. Excuse me, if you want to come to the classes, you must come on time. Okay? Really. Is because what happens is when you come in, all the eyes sort of turn away, and there's misbehaving a little bit, and they're saying, well, what's he doing coming so here? And for about 2.5 minutes, all the minds drift ever so delicately, according to the discipline of the minds, drift ever so slightly from the Hemshech HaTorah. However, he said that there is another type of oyer, even though it's not really oyer compared to that oyer which is outside, inside the Cholol Hashem, inside the Kadur Hashem. You just started about a week ago in the Chitat. So the Rebbe said the same Lamaila, and he said Eina Chanami, that's not really a Metzius of oyer, and therefore it can be said that it's Kadman Kekad Kadmusa Yisborach. And we're going to see later on why we'll be able to say that. And that is because we made up with the word that we met at the beginning of the last page, right near the top, and that was the word Yechoilas. And we already spoke about that briefly, that Yechoilas is what you could do, really, what you could do, and that is a very elevated, almost unlimited, isn't it? What you could really do is unlimited. In other words, it's elevated and unlimited, and it's called mitzad, and it's mitzad the mile of the etem, and therefore it's called Yechoilas. Or on the other hand, that's not the pshitas of the atzmas, because immediately you say he could do this or he could do that, I mean, I don't know what, then you're already to some extent going away from the etzem pshitas and the mila and the etzem have what you might call hafshota of the atzma. Therefore that's called oyer akol biat musay, and therefore that can be kadmin kadmusay, because what he could do, that is always there. That's always there mitzadi atzmas, and yet immediately you say something that the atzmas could do, then you've already gone down from the pshitas and the etzem of the atzmas. So therefore we'll see about that more as we come along and as we go along in the drush what he mentions here, the Rebbe, but that's the drush of Ki Imcha Merkei Chaim. However, he said, שאינם מבחינת מציאס כלל וכלל, ומאמר לו יקשה על זה קושייס הרמ"ק. Remember, therefore the Ramak, he said you can't possibly say Kadman about anything except the Eivish to him, Eivish himself. So he said, since this is Kol b'toich Atzmusay, and it's only a Yechoilas, it's only a oil in the Atzmus Mamish, therefore that kasha won't be applicable anymore. In other words, we've got now two inyanim. Lefi Rabbeinu Zal. Yeah, the Alter Rebbe. We have the which is Meir Begolui, what they hindered in the bracket, and then we have the Indian of Kol Biat Musay. So they are Meir Mimenu, that's Mein Hamoy, and that's the one who actually does the Yisavit. There's a Kol Biat Musay, but that's Kadman Kikad Musay. He said, Ye boy, Val Yodei Yisavit Me'ain. She said, but since there's a which is mi'ein hamoya, and it's linked to the atzmas, even from dovuk, and therefore it's mi'ein hamoya, and therefore in that boy ve'al yodei, he said mi'ein le, yes, ve'im kol zeh, and nonetheless, einoi atzmas u'mahus haboy mamish, rav b'chidus ham shochas u'ir mimenu levod. It's only ein van ham shochas u'ir mimenu. But that's according to the Alter Rebbe, and to a certain extent, we're going to see from the brackets, it's also that general concept that the Atzmas himself is not the Mahave. No, there's a Madrega between the Atzmas and the Nivroim or the Mishavim Mimeno. Well, that everybody's masking. That was it, the Rebbe in the bracket, V'ainu b'chin sarotzen animsa Mimeno. Now that he's making it, you got to keep your how to cut your shoes or on your toes here. Now he's referring back and taking into account what we saw in the shit of the Mukubalim Harishayim. I know b'chinas rotzen hanimtza mimenu shezo b'chinas shmoy l'da'atom zal. According to the Mukubalim Harishayim, they said that there's also a b'china between the atzmas and the Nivroim, which is bedugma and similar to the Indian of Oyer, but according to them it's not so much the Indian of Oyer per se, but it's the Indian either of Rotzen or Shmoy, because the Ramak said that Shmoy is anyway b'gematria Rotzen. Upirish Shmoy Oyer. He said, according to everybody, to a certain extent, we have to say that Shmoy means Oyer. In other words, Shmoy doesn't mean a completely other Inyan. But according to the Alter Rebbe, it means oyer in the pure concept and the pure idea of oyer, with all the, what you might call the purity of the marshal of oyer l'gabia amoya. As far as they're concerned, they would say that Einoch Hanami, it's a form of oyer, Yeah, and that's what they call it Shmoi, but it's a madrege of Rotzen. According to the Ramami Pano, Koponim, it's a Inyan Rotzen, and according to the other Mukubonim, it's Keser. And the truth of the matter is that they also admit that Keser and Rotzen are very close. 1 to the idea, because like we pointed out in the Marshal of Keser also, once the king puts on the crown, then that's his coronation. That makes him a king over the country. What that he didn't put on the crown, he's not a king yet. He's his tremendous elevator being Bli Kesherim Ha'am. Already what he puts on the crown, that to a certain extent gives him a certain Gilui V'Kesher Klapei Ha'am. Therefore they also hold that the Inifin Keser and Rotzen are connected, not the Ramah Mamish, the other Mukubalim are Rishonim. However, all of them admit that to a certain extent that's connected with a union of Oyer, but it's either Keser or Rotzen, which of course are Krivim Zeh. However, he said, Zeu Shechidish Rabbeinu Zal. He said, however, in that Lashon, Oyer, which can be connected with Shmoi, they hold it as in Van Rotten. Came along the Alter Rebbe, and he gave in that a Chiddush. Yesh b'zeh beish madreges, and the Alter Rebbe said that in Uya, which is anyway connected with Shmoi, yesh b'zeh beish madreges, mashu hu b'chinas gilui, hainu gam lifnei atimtum. When we say gilui, we mean even before atimtum. Ve'al zeh enu shayach lo mekadmin chasver. And that's where he differs. They hold that madrega of Rotzen or Keser is Kadmon. It's this tremendous Chiddush Svara of the Alter Rebbe Mein Hamoer. Va'beis, the second madrega in the Indian of Shmoi being connected with Oyer, is Oyer Kamosha Korol Biatzmusei Mamish. Ubebchina Zu Shayach Lo Mekadmen Kekadmusis Barak Ukamosha Yes Oyer. That's going to be dealt with at much length, as we saw in Drush Ki Imcha Makir Chaim, which is not the coming Maimon, but the one after. So everybody sort of beginning to think, well, Ad Mosai, we're going to get to that particular Maimon. It's a good question, but we just have to keep, as a famous old quip has it, we just have to keep hammering along. However, the Mechubalim Rishonim, they at least have a certain revach, they also earn a certain good point, and of course the Alter Rebbe was Machadish Legabidem, his Chiddush, which meaning that everybody, including the Alter Rebbe, but the Alter Rebbe is a Chiddush Legabi them, which is the Mechubalim Rishonim. He said that they earned through that by saying that the Yisavas was from Rotzen Akodum or from Keser, which was Ein Sof Mitalat Veri. So they earned in that the Yisavas is not from the very etzem of Atzmus Ein Sof himself, Mamish, the Yiksher Lafizeh, because you would immediately have a kasha according to that. How could you possibly say that the Eibishter didn't have any shinui whatsoever if he himself, as it were, was actually directly involved in the Etzem Yisavas? Sha'arihu al-Koponi Mokela Oilamas. If you're going to say that the Atzmus himself brought about the Oilamas, then in some ways he's a mocker for them. If you're a mocker for something, you must have some form of relationship or kesher or ispilas or reckoning with it or admitting that it has a matziyah. If you're a mock of something, then you can't just, how do you call it, shake it off. You can't just say, oh, it's not my having what to do with it, cloud. Edifer, that's what they were interested in, being Maraviach, the Mekubalim Rishonim, and the Alter Rebbe, of course, with his great Chiddush. They earned that you don't say that the Yisavas was directly from the Atzmas, Mitzad, the Pasuk of Rosh Nisi, because if you do, then he's al Koponim Amokele Oilmas. Ule Divreihem, but according to their opinion, that it was only from the Rotzen or the Keser, Nicha, that at least is good. Nicha meaning Ein Kushia, meaning Nicha from Russian Manucha in Aramic, meaning that it's good. Ein kushya. Shai Savas, who mipchinas hakesa oya arotzen. The Savas are not directly from the Eivishter. It's from a dovashe, olu mimeno, or al kaponim heir mimeno. Even from Ein Seif, but Ein Seif pure in the sense of it's Ein Seif mitzad atzmei, and that's either hakesa oya arotzen. Ulazais beginas atzmasai haboidi is barak loy shonishi klal. And therefore they're able to rectify the fact that ein achanami, in the very essence of the boire himself, there's been no shinui whatsoever. Mipnei she'ena beginas moker le'elamas ki im harotzen hanimto mimenu. What is a moker for the elamas? Harotzen hanimto mimenu. So if there's any shaykhs, any kesher, any is pilot kosher, then it's lekabi the rotzen bilvada, but not lekabi the and the achmes. Amamela kunta is that in a way, to a certain extent, the word rotzen will be good, because rotzen implies that you want something. Amamela, that implies that there's a certain preparation for his pilot. But immediately you say that you are a being with a will, then that indicates that you are in some way shy to being either fulfilled your will or not. In other words, you have a will. As if you have a will, then that means that there's a fulfillment or otherwise of that will. And I think that the etzem getter of the word rotzen implies a certain readiness to what you might call a reaction or a hispilot. Therefore, they don't mind that there'll be a certain hispilot like Gabi the rotzen, but they take away the rotzen from the atzma, and they say it's not the atzmas which is being mispoiled, but it is the rotzen. And therefore, he said the Ramah makes very careful reference to that particular point. Or in the Sefer that we quoted at the beginning, the Yoin Selim, and the other spot that we quoted from the Ramah. Shebechinas harotzen hanikra ein seif hu sibo reshina elanim toim she'ein sibo lamaylahi menu liyesh bechinas moke elanim toim. So therefore, said the Rama, he comes up with a slightly new concept that we're moving into now, Sibo, cause. And therefore he calls that rotzen, according he calls it the first cause. Now this is what you often hear in the words of the philosophers and the Sugeim, Lumineim, and all sorts of so-called rationalists and all sorts of peoples, what they throw around this idea of the first cause. Everything must go back to something which brought something about, and so therefore they call what they talk about the first cause. And so somebody want to say, well, maybe he's the first cause. So the Ramah says that there is a first cause, but the first cause is the rotzen, not the Eibishter Mamish. And now when he uses the word cause, sibo, we're going to see that is very meduyak. Of course, everything that these great people said was Baruch HaKodesh, whatever they said is B'tachas HaDiyuk. And when we say sibo, then we mean a cause in the pure sense of the word cause in English. However, not to be confused, klau, as we pointed out on numerous occasions, with the union of ilava Olul in certain great greatest in the Jewish Mukabbalim and thinkers, that you don't the phrase Ilav Olul has nothing to do with cause. No, Ilav Olul means a thing which functions in its proper way. The Ilah, it gives forth, but the Mamela from it Alul. Ashenkin Sibo means Ador Rachok. Sibo is something which caused something to come about, but it doesn't really have any kasher with it. In other words, if it weren't there, or it wasn't what it is, or didn't do something, then maybe you might not have had the sibba that came out of it. But the sibba is not a direct ol from the mesuvav. The core, the effect is not a direct kasher with the cause. The cause and the effect are essential one to the other. If they hadn't been the cause, there wouldn't be an effect. But not that the effect and the cause are in any way intimately or be'erich linked one to the other. And therefore, the inyan from our cause, in the real sense, is distant by definition from its effect. Mashahin iliva ol are not, and iliva ol are not called an effect, but iliva ol are derivative and source point. What am I? Source point and derivative. That's what is iliva ol. Okay, so therefore the Ramach is careful to say that this madrege, what he calls the Rotzen Akodum, right? He says that is called the Sibba of the Sibba Rishoino, and he said she ain't Sibba l'mayla mimenu liyosh b'chinas moker animtor. There's no Sibba higher than that Rotzen that could be a moker to all the nimtoim. Now he's going to earn a lot through that by calling it only a Sibba. Because with that he's also going to get rid of this whole problem of his pilas and interaction. Like we just said, a Sibba cannot necessarily be, not necessarily at all be linked by way of his pilas with its mesuvab, with its effect. And therefore he calls that the first Sibba. What about the Atzmas? So he says the Ramah a very interesting thing. He said, Mahusi v'atzmusei nikra sibas kol asibas. He said that the Eivishter's Mahus v'atzmus, he's called the Sibba of all the Sibbas. Shemimenu nimtza hakul. From him everything is nimtza, is to be found. If he's the Sibba of everything, then what's the difference between the Sibba Rishona and the Sibba's Kol Asibas? He said, Uladaitom, and that's immediately what the Rebbe is going to warn us now. He said, Uladaitom, according to the Ramah and all those people who go with him, Efshe Tzorek Loi Makach. Maybe we can say like this. The Matziyusa is Borach in the very Matthias of the Mahus of the Eibishter, Nimtzo Harotzen. Avaloshu Prinas Moker Chasper. In other words, why is the Eibishter called Sibas Kol Asibas? Because ultimately everything has to come from me. You can't all of a sudden have a Sibba Rishona and say, well, that's a Sibba Rishona, but the Eibishter, he's not anything with that. I mean, that's how completely this Rotzen or Kesef wouldn't really be the Eibishter's Rotzen, it would be the Rotzen, it would be a Rotzen in its own right, as it were. And it would be just completely divorced from the Eibishter. That you can't, obviously you can't say. So you have to say, that the Eibishter's Sibas Kol Sibas Kol Asibas. So the Rebbe said, what we have to say is that Lefishetosam Zicha in the Pshitas and in the absolute Avdorah of the Atzmas, there is to be found Aini, which is called Rotzen. But that Rotzen is so mudal and so mufshat that it's not called a mocker even to the Rotzen how it is in the Sibba HaRishona. In other words, that it all happens over there, and even from Kfitza Shaloiber Erech HaMadregas Klau, and that fits in with the word Sibba below. Like we point out, the word Sibba is comfortable in that respect. And that's Al Derech, we could say, by way of example, and Al Derech, we could say that that's Al Derech HaMavur in because all these inyonim, one way or another, I mentioned these type of concepts occur in Pnimis HaTorah, brought down in Samech, in the famous Hemshech of Rosh Hashanah in Samech. And the truth is, it's also mentioned in the famous Maimah on Rosh Hashanah of the Mitzvah Rebbe. What's it called? The famous book, little book that the Mitzvah Rebbe wrote about Rosh Hashanah. A Teres Rosh, Yofi. A Teres Rosh. It's also brought down there in the Teres Rosh. The Mitzvah Rebbe of in Samech a little bit more kilo proteus abio, that we say that there is in the Atzmas himself, there's what we call over there a Rotzen Poshut, which is mitzad the Atzmas itself. It's a very amazing drega what he calls over there, the Rotzen a Poshut she mitzad Atzmusa is for it. That there's certain inyan we could say that even though they doesn't want that, and it's not really a mocker for anything in that particular particular point, but there's a certain mitzad, the shleimus of his atzmas, there's a certain inyan of that rotzen as well, even though it's not shayt to any yisroidus or any really wanting in any way, but it's killed mitzad the shleimus of the atzmas. That is what the Mitzvah Rebbe does, and the Rebbe in Rashab in Samech Vav does. And so that's like a sibur rechoika for a lower madreg in the rotzen, which is the first rotzen agoloi koida matimtum v'chulu. Amamir, we could say that that's what the Ramah mipano v'taina, that in the atzmas is kilu munach mitzad the atzmas a certain rotzen portion she'ena beget a mokir cloud to anything, but it's like a sibur rechoika she'ilu lo yezeh lo yegili rotzen cloud afilu b'derech sibur rishoina, which is in the keser. And that's what we'd have to say, that's what the Rebbe hints at here by saying that in the Metzius of the Atzmusa is Barak Nimtza Harotzen, Avaloi B'chinas Makor, it's not a Inifana Amoka, I feel our Sibas are usually Amoka for their Mesuvavim, for their cause, with their fat. That's a Sibba, Rochlecha B'yesa, B'derach, Poshet Mitzad Pshitas Atzmusa is Barak. It's up. Edifier. He said, that's what we have to say according to them. It'll be Muvan, the famous lesson that you say every day, well not every day, there's some of the Sfadim say it every day, what you say on every Friday, you say in the Posik Eliyahu, but since it's only once a week on Friday, you said it's probably being audacious to imagine that you guys remember it from 1 week to the other, but in the Posik Eliyahu that you say on Friday afternoon, dort steht Antu Sibis Antu Ilas Ha-Ilois Vesibas Ha-Sibois. We call the Eivster, we say you are the Ila of all the Oruls, you had to call the Ilas Ha-Ilois, and you are the Sibas Ha-Sibois. So it's Mavur, the Rebbe is going to mention to you in a minute. It's Mavur considers that Ilas Ha-Ilois, that's the first Ila, literally, but that's what we're talking about, the Mokir of Mamalik Olamin. In other words, Mamalik Olamin entires Madrega. Therefore, everything that goes from that, like we saw, is Lafi Erech Haruchni, as Yamamela, this is Einim Fanam Shocha B'derech Erech, and leads to a Stauselus Madrega and the Madrega. Be'ilu Sibis Hatzibay. Yeah, that's the Abish now. He's the Mokir of Sibis, with Zayid for Derech Rochik, and Derech Seyiv, Kolam, Derech Havdolah, Havdolah Erech, and yet nonetheless we say, Antu, you are Sibis HaSibis. I already say he's Sibis HaSibis. That's what we were trying to support the Ramah. We say that even mitzad the atzmis is a certain Indian from a machias of Reish Shurotzen, yeah, b'teich ha'atzmis Gavke.
Could you refer to the Atmos as an Elo though?
Yeah.
It says Elo of all Elohim. That's referring to the Atmos?
Ilas ha'ilas.
Yeah.
We just point out that's even from Mamalekah. That's a level of Mamalekah. Because that's easy square for us. The difficult one is Sibas HaSibas. Edifier. So says the Rebbe. That's in according to the Ramah, Mipano, and the Mukubolim Arishay. Okay, however, Haramak so Yimoin Bozeh. However, the Ramak, he ultimately will refuse to say this. Yimoin means he will refuse. V'sfiralei, and he is of the opinion, the Akushia, Eich Loi Shonisi, Loi Kasha Midei. He said that the Kasha how the Eivus never had any Shinui Mitzad Atzmus, Loi Kasha Midei, that's not a Kasha at all. As you all know, in the Gemara sometimes occurs that expression like Kasha Midei, there's no Kasha at all. Imi Yois, who Atzmusa is Barak Mamish Siba Harashoino. Even though we'll say that the Eivishter Atzmusa, let's call him Siba Harashoino. We can even call him the Siba Harashoino, like the Ramah would call the Rotzen. Let's call the Eivishter Siba Harashoino. He said, who Rapapina save of Kolamin, Vaina Mislabish Venitvas Betoichom, Velikamoya Nishoma Be, Velachin Ein shum shini boy bar mebriata. The Hamasuvav ain't a poyo shini ba siba. Oh, that's what we're looking for. So in other words, the Ramach, he says, what's the whole problem? Let's say that what the Tikkun Isaiah onto Sibas Hasibas referring to Atzma Saint to the Eibishter. And he's called the Sibba Rishoyna. You don't have to make a difference between Sibba Rishoyna and Nimtz, call it Sibba. When I answer that, let's say he's the Sibba Harashoyna. He said the difference between the concept of Ilah V'Olav, V'Yitaushel, V'Chulu, and the union for Sibba, that is enough. He said, because a Sibba has no connection whatsoever with its Mesuvav. And there's no kilo revealed error, even though mitzat the kavona aliyina v'chulu, there might be some sort of a, things don't just cholila happen any old how. I mean, obviously there is a connection, but begolui in a form of error ain't co connection bein tela ter. And the fact that Rebbe Rashab brings down when again to Kriyas Yamsu, sometimes you see things just happen, well, even Pili plays, Beliko Hachono, Beliko Kesha, Bein Zela Zeh, and it can be in a regular memory, Ami. Well, that is the answer to all the peoples. What they go around with long faces and they say, oh, you keep talking about the Geula and when's it going to happen and what's the problem and why you turn back, leave the girl alone, you just drive people crying, let's just be, sort of unhappy and Madame Tussauds, and the whole thing. That's what they say. So the answer is that the Golas is terribly horrible, and there's a tremendous number of headaches with the Golas, and the whole thing is Mishugir in ways. In one split second, it can all alter and change and take you from Miyad, and that's what the Rebbe says. Rega memory. And it's not just that the Rebbe says, state in Shulchan Aruch. You guys probably learn it either in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch or in somebody Shulchan Aruch. It's written again in a Tilish Yadayim, for example, the Suda. One of the reasons that we do that because of the infant Strach Truma. It's really because of the Kohanim. They're to blame for the whole thing. We're not Kohanim. But we have to wash our hands because Shema, the Alter Rebbe brings the Shema Yibona Beis HaMikdash. And immediately after you wash your hands, the next time you come to wash your hands, there will already be a Beis HaMikdash, and everybody's going to have to wash their hands in order to eat Truma. The outsiders made a gezerah that you have to wash your hands before you eat Truma. And that's the whole reason we make Natilas Yadayim L'Suda. And who's going to have to do that? The Kohanim. Ordinary people aren't going to be eating Truma. I say ordinary people, I mean, Yidden are not going to be eating Truma. So the Tzadinian is no to leave Kohanim, and it's no because Shema Yibona Beis HaMikdash take it from Miyad Mam. I mean, they state in Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe brings it up in Hilchos Natilas Yadayim. He will say any second anything can happen, and it all depends on you. If you really believe in Kochset that it's going to happen, then ain't a Chanama. And the Rebbe brings in, the Rebbe Rashab brings in Tov Reish Nun Ches, it's another Hemshech altogether. That was the year that they said he was very ill. That year. And you should look at some of the greatest Chidushim hidden in that Sefer, in Tov Reish Nun Ches. You'll see all of them Sefer, they give you back to earlier Maimonim, in the Marim, maybe they go back to that Sefer one way or another. And they said that year that he was terribly ill. As he stayed. Upon him. So the Rebbe Rashab writes over there that Kriyas Yamsu, here I came, just stood in front of the mitzvah just a few kilometers behind, and this huge sea in the way where, what are we doing? Said it, the whole thing's candy. So then we had all these Mars Clear and they said, let's go back, and others said, let's jump into the sea, and others said, we'll try and make a mechama, and do it. And the Rebbe said, nobody really thought of the answer, just keep going. Keep going. I just walk into the sea. Yeah. And all of a sudden, that's exactly what Nachshon ben Aminadab did. He just went into the sea, and then boom, all of a sudden, this is huge, unbelievable, and that's called Kriyas Yam. Yam Suf, there's no error between them. He'd put his foot into the water, he jumped into the water, it's erg, dat had te doen met pneumisatig. Ik weet met hoe. He's erg, je moet zeggen. Pneumisatig zei, wat voor kersen had some kersen. I didn't really need to beat him, so he kept my under. He was the one that didn't show us have a part in Chris Yam. I'm serving, that's what we gave over in the Shir Kloli last week, B'Shem Maral Mipra. There was you see, Niflo, Venera, what the Maral Mipra puts down, that ain't no Chanami. Everything in a Nes Amiti for the Avis is the Avis, and this the man, but the man has to do something, so they bear a cloud, because the Avis the one, he should open something there in the net. Remember, the Rebbe said, believe the Rebbe said, go out and put tefillin on another, you do it. Could be that that's exactly what we're waiting for. Me wasn't very. I'm not that's in van het Sibbe. Dat is de tijd Sibbe staat. Dat is de tijd Sibbe staat Sibbe. De vader Ramak, de Ramak, he said, what's it the kaasje? You can call it even Sibbe Harishon. He said, because anyway, Sibbe is completely rochig from the Mesua, ain't by name, Kesha. He said, it's not like the neshama inside the guf. The neshama is not a sibba for the chayes of the guf. So the neshama enters the body and it's mislavish because also it's like a form of ha'ila and ha'olo. It's not but the sibba or masuba. Well, ain't shum shinoi boy is brought by brings our elements. The amasuvav ain't a poil shini basiba because the effect doesn't cause any change in the cause. In other words, cause and effect are a chaykim zeh He's there. That's how I have fresh pain. Ilas ha'ilois la sibasa sibe. The ilas ha'ilois the ha'olum poil shinui ba'ol. Avo sibasa sibois. Ain't a masura poil shinui. And the father Amma says, call him the sibba like Patlikla. Call him sibba Arishain. The first cause. He said the etymology from Sibba is indicative of what he calls Seiv Kalalmi. Seiv Kalalmi was a called Shaitas Vakesha. And he was a aim was a call his pilots below. Being Cain, who Sibas Kola Sibba. In Mamela, the Eberste Sibas Kola Sibba. Op begin zou er aan mijn slabisch mamisch peilen. Yeah, what about the van the Eramamali? Yeah, the Eramamali does go down and does undergo the van Shinuim, Madrigas, Ilas Ailas, with the guns in the way. There is a Shinui Matadama Mamali, there is Shinuim and his pilots Matadama Mamali. So therefore he said, no, the Ramak would answer that one also. The Ramak would have a way out of that. Yam came. He said, begin zou er mislabisch mamisch poelemas hoe laat me beginnen dwara vaaien shu haore getene shem poel shumshuniken and even with the mamale what it looks at there would be his pilots lapped after it would be his pilots I feel him it's there elama he said because the Indian is only dibble like we were married in the previous part of the Hampshire the dibble is the Indian from getene is Bill the American said the Ramak's got a very good policy, and he's got a very good case, the Ramak, that he's not affected by the fact that you call the Avish a Sibba. I wasn't gave him from Malikulam in Dorte, Yodo Shinuim. You tell now, even they don't have to say the Shinuim, because we take the Bechina Ki Achreina, where that's a Dini from Tibba from them, the Avish to make some Malikulam. Well, Yelka Polimagala Dini from Mamali. Here we find an amazing thing. When you first look at the Ramak, he seems to be Mamish Rochik with Divrei Achsidus Beklau. And all of a sudden the Rebbe's made him the Dafki of the Ramak. He can find, which are Martimim, Lashitasa, Achsidus Baal Rebbe's Pili place. And that's in effect what the Alter Rebbe said. Because the Alter Rebbe said that there's no Shinui even in the Ura Mamali. This is the Alter Rebbe said. There's no Shinui even in the Ura Mamali. From which? Because it's all from Bechina Hakri Chitonius, Vaki Achreina, where it's called the Tibu. That's what he starts off in Tanya, Perikov. Take a look and you'll see that the elder was an Shinui boy is Borov. Loi Bachtu say, מפני שבדבר הוויה שמיים נעשו. The whole thing is only diva. Diva is nicht kashina. Afilo b'chinas islapsha. It's not a islapsha samitiya. I stayed Perikov. You look up Perikov. The whole thing. It's one on a Tanya is like the Torah Shebiksacha. It's like the Chimish. It's like everything in Tanya is little sort of words. You know. Later on, you start to you learn a whole piece and says, "Wait a minute, isn't that written in Tanya?" You look up and you see in the Alter Rebbe said in about 5 words over there. It's the same thing here. Yeah, שאין בו פועל שינוי כנעל, והרביע בו זה. Yeah, so by saying all this, the Ramak, that he earned. In other words, he got into a good situation. He earned, but with that, she'ein tzarich loimer shame ain't safe. Zulas al mahusi vatzmusi barak levad. You don't have to say the term ain't safe, but that means all these unbelievable shlilas kol shlilas and shlilas kol toyadim and all those that we saw was in for ain't safe. Only vatzmusi is barak levad. And these they wanted to say that no, the Ein Sof is more better on something which is already only all women, not Mahuzi Vatzmusi Hizbara. Because they didn't want Mahuzi Vatzmusi to be involved. So there was by without saying what they said, you can still say that Mahuzi Vatzmusi Hizbara not involved. So therefore he said the Ramak earns a very good way without getting into this whole problem of Kadman Kikamusa. וגם אין צורך לא רוצים קודם חס ושלום. Here the Rebbe puts in a chas v'sholem, even though he said earlier that was the beer in the Ramah Mipano. Now he writes אין צורך לא רוצים קודם חס ושלום. כי הוא לבד היה קדמן, והוא לבד בבחינת הוא אין ספר אמיתי, אין לו תחילה ואין לו tichlo. He doesn't have any beginning, he doesn't have any finality. בבחינת בלי גבול בי אמס. He said, "V'chein hu ha'emes kenhal." The Rebbe said that so. If you think carefully about the Ramah, then you come to the conclusion that is really ultimately there. At the emes, even though the Alter Rebbe's got certain slight differences from the Ramah, in certain concepts, v'chuli, of a benegeh to the inyan from atzmusay and the lack of any necessity to involve atzmusay in the etzem abriya, that the Alter Rebbe and the Ramak all b'chad shitosa. ובאמת שדרך זו של הרמ"ק נכונה וסלולה יותר. You see that? The Rebbe said that this way of the Ramak is more correct and it's more, well paved. The word salul means well paved out. You call when they make a new crease, they put pavement. They put down. You make a road.
Smooth.
Asphalt.
Smooth.
Yeah. We'll make it out of
tar.
Tar. That's what it is. Whatever. That's called derech slula. Solel tader. He said that therefore the Ramak, the way that the Ramak has is nachoina uslula yoter. She'ef shaloim aslal inyan rotzen kodum. The Rebbe is not getting sharp a bit with the Ramak. He said you can't really say this whole inyan of rotzen kodum. The miyachish is prinas matzias dovo. You see, that's what we've been pointing out the whole time. When you say the word rotzen, you automatically imply a certain inyan with the rotzen is rotzeh. So that's already a certain matzias, because you would say that every wanted it, that he's giving it a certain importance of something. It's already kilo, or if he's being megal a koyach that would eventually want that, then that koyach which is being megal, which might eventually want a certain thing, has already become a guided inyan. It has some sort of a matzias. Therefore, you can't very well say something which is a matzias. You can't very well say. How can we say that it's primordial and it's in from Kadman? The Meyachish is beginnes Matzias Dova, she'ena beginnes Atzmas, eik noima al zeh shehu kadum chas b'sholem. Shezeu eino shayech ki im al Atzmas v'loy al zu losei. Only on the Atzmas and not on anything to be considered apart from him. And Mamil said the Rebbe, Im Kain, the Ramak, has got a very basically defensible and well-trodden path. Im Kain, Bechinas HaRotzen, She'eno Atzmus, Hu Nimtzo Min Atzmus, Eich Noima Al Zeh, Kadum, Chas V'Sholim. So we see that ultimately the Rebbe, to a certain extent, defends himself from the Shitta of the Ramak, as you might call, he is, to use the expression in the modern Hebrew, who mistayeg mizeh, he sort of fences himself somewhat from it, and he even uses the expression, ultimately, chasve sholem, that it's difficult very much to say that. He said, the gam boyer ein seishel, ne'at simsum, b'meh sheshayach loima, b'chinas alois harotzen, hu mechudash, that the Rebbe said that even if we take lifnei simsum, on a Samadrega where we do already begin to talk about the Rotzen appearing, he said it's a new thing, it's a mechudash, it's a new, what you call produced entity. That you can't say on primordial Madrega is the word Ratzon, because a Ratzon is always like a new in it, and that's the whole concept of Ratzon. Ratzon means that there's something which is going to add now to a new situation which Kira wasn't there before. That's why you want. The basic concept of Rotzen implies that a new situation has arisen. Therefore, he said the whole concept of Rotzen is what we call a inyam mechudash. It's like a new inyan, which the Eibishter mitatamim hayaduim lo yizbarach is allowing to be revealed. He said if it's a inyam for mechudash, then it's not the inyam for kodum kadmusa yizbarach. It's not mamish shleimus hakadmus of the atzma. And therefore he said, come to us, he said, even in what we talk about, where it is shy somewhat to say the going up and the occurrence of the Rotzen, then it's a mechudash. Even what the Alter Rebbe time is there, shuhu chudash. והיינו שהוא נמצא ממנו וברצונו ידווקא, או בהכרח חס ושלום. אם כן, הוא כמו שקודמי ההיעדר. Even the oil, what the Alter Rebbe talks about, is also a mechudash. It's something which wasn't always there. If it wasn't always there, then it's kodmei ha'heder, that preceded it, the absence of its own self. It's even at a point where it wasn't, and then it comes about, then it's a mekudash. And remember, that's what we're going to see as we go along, that's the unbelievable chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. That even though the oil is kodmei ha'heder, the oil is takiyam adova mekudash, the emesis, that's the from there. Nonetheless, in that oil is nimtza the koyach of the Ein Sof. Not the Ein Sof, but the koyach of the Ein Sof is nimtza mamish in the oil, mitzad mi ein amoer, or ki ein amoer, like the Megillah HaKodesh, and that is the greatness. What about Kodmei HaHeder? You want Kodmei HaHeder? Let's go back into Yechilas, into Od Madregas, in Klulim B'Teicha Atzmas, not Mamish Atzmas, and then we'll be able to say Kodmei HaHeder. I'm going to see the unbelievable koyach of the Alter Rebbe. So the other day, on Shabbos, I was in a shul in Geneva, and I said that the Rebbe said that all of our Rebbeim were Nevi'im. They were like the Chiddush of the Koyach HaNavuah. Comes up to me, a Polish guy, and he said, it's a bit much, say, all the Chabad Rebbeim were Nevi'im. I mean, he wasn't Choylik, I'll say, he was just a bit taken. So I said, listen, you just really study the Alter Rebbe. The trouble is, we don't know anything about the Rebbe. We just know a bit what the Alter Rebbe is all about. I said, you study, you go into the Inyanim of the Alter Rebbe, and you'll see that his koyach in Torah is the koyach HaNavuah. It's not shaykh otherwise. It's only the inyan from Gilui Soid Hashem LeNaviyah. So I'm telling you that this whole business here, now the Alter Rebbe is machriya between all these unbelievable madrigas, and he owns all the things that and he owns them all. He brings them in such a way that it all makes this unbelievable doctrine of the Me'ein HaMoyer. I'd like to leave you with a slightly controversial at bedtime, whatever. If you are in it's but that's all in a nation from the. I'm not saying that the other great Mukabalim weren't, but be Ruach HaKodesh. Of the famous one of the famous Kufa, to which is higher Ruach HaKodesh on Nevuah. So the Rebbe Rashab says in a place that Nevuah is higher than Ruach HaKodesh, because Nevuah is the highest possible, and it comes down B'tachlis into the proof of itself in Matthias Mamish Kipshoteh. Ruach HaKodesh is a higher and more Helam Dikit. Avein Kana Machon Lahari, B'chol Ma'elo V'yesh Lahari, and Derike Yechia Melech Hama Mashiach.
Can I ask a question? I've heard you say this before, that the whole Kabbalah Yom with the Rebbeim. So this question came up in my mind when we were doing Siyum Rambam. So Rambam said the Nevuahs are going to come back to Jewish people right before the times of Mashiach. The whole Torah was 200 years ago.
So my dear sir, you should realize that the Baal Shem Tov, and even the great tzaddikim, the historian prior to the Baal Shem Tov, they all said that now is the moment for the Gilui of Mashiach. And why doesn't it come? All of them, the Pe'echot, have all been saying that yes, the Zeit, and in the famous Sivan in Toshin on Aleph, Pasha Shaitim, the Roy writes over there that the Ike revelation of the Indian from Nevuah was with the Baal Shem Tov Talmud. They state that. Over the Rebbe says that the truth of the matter is that there was never a time when there weren't Nevi'im. Because if you look in the Rambam carefully, you see the Rambam doesn't say that there was ever really a time when there weren't Nevi'im. It's not necessary to say that. That just that there were certain times when the Nevuah is more behelim, it's at the Metzias of the Olam. Over the Etzemini for Nevuah is always there. And over the Rebbe brings in that city, you look right near the famous Mari Mochim, the Rebbe Pele Digizah, but the Rambam brings in one of the Balei HaTosefos, one of the great teachers of the Tosefos at the time of the Tosefos. What was he called? Somebody other, Sagi Nohor. He was blind. He couldn't actually, he didn't have the Koyach Hariyah Hagashmi, yes. There is written about him that the Balei HaTosefos said about him that he was a Novi. They said the Hoyeroi Nevuah. And the Rambam writes in the Geras Teiman, or the Geras Tchizanis in the Geras Teiman. The Rambam writes before, he said, Biyomo, there was a Novi. The Rambam says there was a person that he says he was a